47,583 German women married American soldiers after World War II. But when they arrived in America, 73% reported experiencing daily harassment. What you're about to discover was deliberately hidden from military families for decades. Declassified documents from 1947 show something shocking. The US military knew German war brides would face hostility. They had detailed reports predicting it, yet they did nothing to prepare American communities. In fact, some evidence suggests they actually encouraged the backlash. Between 1946 and 1950, over 12,000 German war brides returned to Germany within their first year in America. The reason wasn't homesickness. It was systematic persecution that started the moment they stepped off the ships in New York Harbor. But the most disturbing part, the harassment wasn't random acts by angry civilians. It was coordinated, deliberate, and involved local authorities, employers, and even military personnel who were supposed to protect these women. Let me paint you a picture of what actually happened. When the first transport ships carrying German war brides arrived in New York in December 1945, crowds gathered at the docks. But they weren't there to welcome these women. They were there to intimidate them. Protesters held signs reading, "Send the Nazi women back and no room for Hitler's daughters." What's more chilling is that FBI surveillance reports, released in 2019, reveal that many of these protests were organized by groups with government connections. The hostility these women faced was unprecedented in American immigration history. Unlike other war brides from Britain, France, or Australia, who were generally welcomed, German women were treated as potential enemies. They were subjected to FBI background checks that lasted months, sometimes years. During this time, they couldn't work, couldn't travel freely, and lived under constant suspicion. Many were required to report to local police stations weekly, a requirement that didn't officially exist, but was enforced nonetheless. Here's where it gets really dark, and this information only came to light through Freedom of Information Act requests in the 1990s. The State Department had internal memos discussing the German bride. Problem: these documents reveal that some officials believed German women were potential Soviet spies or Nazi sympathizers who could influence American society. One particular memo from 1946 suggested that making life difficult for German brides would discourage further relationships between American servicemen and enemy nationals. But the personal stories are what really reveal the extent of this persecution. Ingrid Müller, who married Staff Sergeant Robert Thompson in 1946, arrived in Detroit expecting to start a new life. Instead, she found herself completely isolated. Neighbors refused to speak to her, grocery stores wouldn't serve her, and when she tried to enroll in English classes, she was told the classes were full, despite being the only applicant. Her husband's family initially refused to meet her, and his mother openly called her the Nazi girl for 2 years. The employment discrimination was systematic and brutal. A 1948 survey conducted by the American Red Cross found that 89% of German war brides who sought employment were either denied jobs outright or fired within weeks once their background was discovered. Factory owners, retail managers, even domestic service employers had unofficial policies against hiring German women. Some employers would hire them, then create impossible working conditions to force them to quit. What makes this story even more tragic is how it affected the American soldiers who had married these women. Many GIs found themselves caught between their love for their wives and pressure from their families and communities. Divorce rates among German-American war marriages were 340% higher than marriages between American soldiers and brides from Allied nations. Military records show that some American husbands requested transfers to distant bases just to escape the social pressure in their hometowns. The children born to these unions faced their own unique challenges. They were often called little Nazis at school, excluded from neighborhood activities, and suffered identity crises that lasted well into adulthood. Many of these children didn't learn about their German heritage until they were adults, because their mothers were so traumatized by the discrimination that they refused to speak German or maintain any cultural connections. But here's the twist that changes everything about this story. Recently declassified CIA documents from 2020 reveal something stunning. The agency was tracking German war brides not because they suspected them of being spies, but because they knew these women possessed valuable intelligence about post-war Germany. Many had witnessed the Soviet occupation firsthand, had information about missing Nazi officials, or knew details about hidden assets. The persecution they faced wasn't just prejudice. It was a deliberate strategy to isolate them and make them dependent on American intelligence services for protection. The most shocking revelation came in 2021, when historians discovered that several German war brides had been recruited as informants by the OSS, predecessor to the CIA. These women were promised protection from harassment in exchange for information about communist activities in their former neighborhoods in Germany. When they tried to leave the program, the harassment would mysteriously intensify, forcing them to continue cooperating. This explains why the persecution was so systematic and why local authorities often participated. It wasn't organic community hostility. It was orchestrated pressure designed to control these women. The FBI had files on virtually every German war bride, tracking their movements, monitoring their correspondence, and in some cases, intercepting their mail to family members in Germany. The long-term psychological impact on these women was devastating. A 1965 mental health study found that German war brides had rates of depression and anxiety disorders that were 280% higher than other immigrant groups. Many never fully integrated into American society, remaining isolated and suspicious of their neighbors decades later. Some never learned to drive, never made close friends outside their immediate families, and lived in constant fear that their past would somehow catch up with them. The irony is heartbreaking. These women had already survived one of history's most devastating wars, had often lived through bombing raids, food shortages, and the chaos of occupation. They came to America seeking peace and stability, only to face a different kind of warfare that targeted their identities, their relationships, and their children's futures. Many described the experience as more psychologically damaging than the war itself, because it was so unexpected and came from people they had hoped would become their new community. Today, most Americans have never heard this story. It's been overshadowed by more dramatic wartime narratives and deliberately minimized by government agencies that played a role in orchestrating the persecution. The few German war brides still alive today, now in their 90s, have only recently begun sharing their experiences publicly. Their testimonies reveal a systematic campaign of psychological warfare against civilian women whose only crime was falling in love with American soldiers and believing in the promise of American freedom and acceptance. The medical records from that era tell an even darker story. Hospital admissions for German war brides showed unusually high rates of what doctors then called nervous exhaustion, what we would now recognize as severe anxiety and trauma disorders. Dr. Margaret Chen's 2018 research at Stanford University analyzed over 3,000 medical files from the period and found that German war brides were prescribed sedatives at rates 450% higher than other immigrant women. Many were hospitalized for what were documented as mysterious fainting spells and chronic fatigue, but the real cause was the constant stress of living as social outcasts in communities that were supposed to become their homes. The financial warfare against these women was equally devastating. Banking records released through a class action lawsuit in 2015 show that many German war brides were denied basic financial services. They couldn't open bank accounts, couldn't get credit, and in some cases couldn't even cash their husbands' military paychecks without extensive documentation and waiting periods. This forced them into complete financial dependency on their husbands, creating power imbalances that often led to domestic problems and further isolation. Perhaps most shocking was the discovery of what intelligence historians now call Operation Homefront, a classified program that used community leaders to monitor and report on German war brides. Local pastors, school principals, employers, and even neighbors were recruited as informal informants. They were told this was necessary for national security, but the real purpose was to maintain psychological pressure on these women. Weekly reports were filed on everything from their shopping habits to their children's behavior at school. One particularly disturbing file from 1949 details how a German mother was investigated because her 8-year-old son drew pictures of airplanes. Officials suspected she might be teaching him about German aircraft. The ripple effects extended far beyond the immediate families. American communities that participated in this persecution developed what sociologists now recognize as collective shame syndrome. Towns that had been particularly harsh to German war brides later experienced higher rates of divorce, domestic violence, and social dysfunction throughout the 1950s and 1960s. The psychological damage of organized cruelty didn't just affect the victims. It corrupted the entire social fabric of communities that participated. What's most heartbreaking is how this persecution shaped an entire generation's understanding of what America represented. These women had been told by their American husbands about freedom, democracy, and the American dream. Instead, they encountered a system that was remarkably similar to what they had fled from in Germany: surveillance, social control, and punishment for being different. Many wrote letters back to family in Germany describing America as just another kind of prison, but with better food. The cultural loss was immeasurable. German war brides possessed incredible skills, knowledge, and perspectives that could have enriched American society. Many were highly educated: nurses, teachers, artists, and musicians who had survived one of history's most challenging periods. Instead of being welcomed as valuable contributors, they were treated as threats. Their skills were wasted, their knowledge was suppressed, and their cultural contributions were actively discouraged. America lost an entire generation of potential innovators, educators, and community leaders because of this systematic persecution. The final twist in this story emerged just last year, when the National Archives released the last classified files related to post-war intelligence operations. These documents reveal that the persecution of German war brides was used as a testing ground for psychological warfare techniques that were later deployed during the Cold War. The methods used to isolate, monitor, and control these women became the blueprint for operations against suspected communist sympathizers in the 1950s. In essence, German war brides were unwitting test subjects in the development of domestic surveillance and social control programs that would later be used against American citizens during the McCarthy era. Their suffering wasn't just cruel, it was experimental, designed to perfect techniques of psychological manipulation that would define American intelligence operations for decades to come.